Hi, Nutrition 111 students. We are going to take a look at Chapter 2. Okay. And this chapter focuses on designing a healthy eating pattern. So we'll be looking at some recommendations and reference points for doing just that, with the goal being to describe what a healthy diet is and how to design that healthy diet. We'll start with some words that are used to describe a healthy diet and dig into why they are. So variety describes eating foods from all of the food groups. And this is important because you are more likely to meet your nutrient needs if you choose from all of the different groups. You'll find through your study of nutrition this semester that fruits, for instance, are rich in nutrients that are often quite different from what you find in dairy or what you find in protein. So to meet your nutrient needs across the board, you also need to choose from all of these groups. We also talk quite a bit about balance. What is a balanced diet? It's probably one of the most common terms used to describe a healthy diet. A balanced diet can focus solely on calories, and therefore it is describing when you're meeting your calorie needs appropriately, but it can also be used to describe the types of food in your diet and the proportions of those foods, with the goal being more nutrient-dense foods and fewer foods that are ultra-processed and high in unhealthy substances. I just mentioned nutrient density. Nutrient density is used quite a bit. Americans do not choose nutrient-dense foods as much as they should be. You'll see in a minute that the goal is to choose 85% of your foods from this category, nutrient-dense foods. And then the other 15%, you can be a little more relaxed about nutritionally. A nutrient-dense food is dense in nutrients. It provides a lot of nutrients with the calories that it provides. I tend to use this term more generally, as in low-fat milk is nutrient-dense, a cola is not. But you can also use it for a specific nutrient, and you can also calculate the nutrient density, which I haven't seen done much in practice. When you shift your diet, I mentioned that this is one of our goals, eat 85% of our foods as nutrient dense. When you shift in that direction, you're moving away from foods that are high in unhealthy fats and sodium and sugars, and toward foods lower in those substances and higher in nutrients. So here are a few examples for you. Moderation, another term. This defines our goal regarding foods that have substances that we're trying to limit. Okay, so we need to moderate foods that are high in unhealthy fats, that are high in added sugars, alcohol, sodium. That's very important, and that's why Dietary Guidelines suggests that we keep those to a slim proportion of the foods that we eat. Now, energy density is almost the flip side of nutrient density, but not quite. When we talk about energy density, we're describing the calories per the weight, okay, or kcals per gram. A high energy dense food is typically packed with a lot of fat and added sugars since they add so many calories. Low energy density foods tend to have more fiber and fluid, more bulk. There's a book written by a professor at Penn State. The title is Volumetrics. She did research on just this, how people can push toward low energy dense foods, and this helps them manage their weight, because we receive a lot of the satiety signals based on the volume of the food. So if you choose foods with very low and low energy density, they tend to have more bulk, more fluid. They tend to fill us up more so than the high energy density foods. Now we're going to shift to talking about those dietary guidelines. I've mentioned them a good bit. They are issued every 5 years by the government, but the government doesn't gather the science. The government doesn't make the recommendations after looking at the science. Experts do that. The government gathers experts together. They look at all the science for the past 5 years, and they make recommendations for what type of diet would keep Americans healthier, would keep them healthy and well, decrease the risk of chronic diseases. So the process is good, but it has a flaw in it, and that is this. After the scientists, the experts, pass their recommendations, and it's usually this big, many-page-long committee report, after they pass that back to the government then has a period where people can comment on their recommendations. And wouldn't you know, the food industry gets involved, and the food industry, having much money, has a good bit of sway. So what happens is they always become diluted in some areas. And let me give you an example for the 2020 Dietary Guidelines. The committee suggested that we should drop added sugar down further from 10% of total calories to 6%. The committee suggested that alcohol in moderation should be defined as 1 drink for men and women, not 1 for women and 2 for men. And this was from the science. The science supported this. The committee, for the past couple of issues of the Dietary Guidelines, has been making the recommendation to limit all red meats, even lean red meat, because there's an increased risk of cancer when you consume loads of it. Those things did not happen, okay? So we still have 10% for sugar. We still have 1 and 2 for drinks in moderation, 1 for women, 2 for men. And we're still kind of dancing around the whole meat issue. Now, I'm not saying that these are bad. They are good, solid recommendations. I'm always a little bit disappointed that they don't go a bit further. But nonetheless, you should take a look at them at dietaryguidelines.gov. And let me stop sharing for 1 minute. I just want to make absolute sure that I can show you this clip. Yes, I can. So we're going to look at a video that highlights some of the focus of the Dietary Guidelines. find more information here as well. It's worth taking a look for sure. So let me click out of this. And these are some recommendations in the 2020 Dietary Guidelines that you will have to work with in your exam, okay, or on your exam. So I wanted to spend a few minutes doing some of the math that you'll have to do. So let's take a look. Added sugar should be less than 10% of calories. Starting at age 2, saturated fat less than 10%, sodium less than 2,300 milligrams. Now, let's see if I can show you something here. All right, so we are going to look at this bottle of Coke in our example, and I am kind of not doing well, so I think I will just read you the numbers. That's not showing up real well. Let me get the whiteboard though. Okay, so here's the question. The question is Joe staying within the 10% or less of the recommendation for added sugar? So let's find out about Joe. Joe drinks 2 of these a day. 2 of these has 65 times 2 grams of added sugar. 65 times 2, so that's 130. And then Joe has another 10 grams of added sugar. So Joe's got 140 grams of added sugar, and he's consuming 2,200 calories total. So the first thing we have to do for this math is to convert the added sugar to calories from added sugar. And we use that 4 kcals per gram. Okay, let me make this a little bigger here so we don't, there we go. And let me pull out my calculator. You can pull out yours. We've got 140 grams total times 4, and this is each day. That gives us 560 calories from added sugar. Okay, now we need to know what percent of the total come from added sugar. So to do that, we go 560 kcals divided by the total calories. We said he consumed 2,200 kcals. Okay, 560 divided by 2,200, that gives us 0.25 for 25%, well above. In fact, he will still be above with 1 bottle of cola per day. So the answer to that question is no, Joe is not within the recommended amount of added sugar. Okay, so I want to show you something else. And to do this, I believe I have to stop the share and reshare. Okay, all right, so here we are. These are the NutriCalc Plus, NCP, to make it easy, reports that you will have after you keep your records and do the work there. So what I want to focus on is saturated fat. So we're going to go down to the report that's called the bar graph report, because it has this individual, okay, and I forget what I named this person, Monique, I think. It has Monique's intake under value, okay? So that's how much she actually consumes. So let's take a look at this. For saturated fat, which should be 10% or less of total calories, Monique consumed 24 grams out of her total of 1,579, all right? So sorry to do this, but it's the only way that I know for sure that we're back where we need to be. All right, so let's do the math. Okay, so Monique we said had 24 grams of saturated fat. And if we're going to figure out percentage of total calories, we need to multiply that. But with fat, any type of fat, you don't use 4, you use 9 kcals per gram. Okay, and let me do the math here. You can as well. That gives us 216 kcals from saturated fat. Okay, now we need to know what percent of the total that is. So it's the same type of math, 216, and Monique had 1579 calories. 216 from saturated fat out of 1579 total. And that gives us 0.14 if we round off, or 14%. Okay, so nope, Monique does not stay within the guidelines either. But I want to show you real quick. Sorry about this. This neat little report does that work for you. So if we go past the spreadsheets, we're going to find a report that says macronutrient distribution. And we see here that saturated fat, just as we calculated, provides 14% of Monique's calories. So that is in the report. Okay. All right. So let's move on and talk about Choose My Plate kind of quickly, because you'll be taking a look at this in your homework. Choose My Plate establishes what the proportions of our diet should look like for the best health. Okay, and that's what you're looking at here. One of the big lessons or messages is a better term of Choose My Plate is that fruits and vegetables should cover half of your plate. And in fact, plant-based foods cover more than 3/4 of the plate as well. So the typical American diet is often very different than that, with a big slab of meat and little dabs of the sides. I like this image down here because it shows what that looks like in terms of real food. Choose My Plate has a website which you will visit. It can be individualized to the person in terms of their specific calorie needs. And I want to mention that for the exam, you need to remember the recommendations for 2,000 calories, since that's often used as the average for Americans. Know the amounts from the different food groups. That will be helpful. Okay. We are falling short in some very nutrient-dense areas here. We're not getting the fruits, vegetables, and dairy that we should be. And we're going over actually in the foods that are sometimes called empty calories, sometimes called foods high in saturated in unhealthy fats and added sugars. So the ultra processed foods we get far too much of, and some of these healthy food groups we're not getting enough of. Now I want to show you one other thing. Sorry about the jumping around here. Okay, hold on one second. So, I closed up the report. Let me find it because I think it's important. It takes a little while, but there we go. Okay. Back. Share screen. Got it. So for your first Nutrition Applied assignment, you're actually going to be looking at, let me see where it is, the My Plate report. The My Plate report is going to take your intake and compare it to your recommendation. So you'll be able to see where you fall with regards to each of these food groups. Okay. All right. So let's keep going. Now, one of the issues with the American diet is that we've lost a sense of what a appropriate portion is for many food, and we can blame a lot of that on the food industry. Your textbook shows some examples of standard objects that we see every day, or we might see, that can help us judge sizes. Notice things like 2 tablespoons of salad dressing or peanut butter is about the size of these 2 die here. Notice that a deck of cards is about the size of 3 ounces meat, poultry, or fish. So this helps us then visualize what a standard or more appropriate portion might be. And this has become a problem. I think type of food, I think availability of food, and I think size of portions have all taken a toll on our health. And you can read through these slides and see the impact. The portions have exploded since the 1950s. And what we know about human behavior with regards to food behavior is that we tend to eat more with our eyes and pay attention to the signals that our body gives us. So if we're given a portion that is double what our body actually needs, we will be eating more than our body needs. And that's become a problem. Okay, I also mentioned the availability of food. Food is everywhere, and what we find everywhere at the mall, in the staples, around school, tends to be the ultra-processed or less healthy foods. Portions are bigger as well. And this food has been designed to make it irresistible. It's high in sugar and fat and salt, and that really dings our brain and gets us craving it. So it's a very difficult food environment, and that difficult food environment leads to health problems. This was a hard-hitting campaign by the New York City Public Health Department to remind people that they're not just portions, that portions of these less healthy foods are taking a toll on our health. Now, before we move on, I want to mention that there are other people that I respect very much who phrase dietary recommendations differently. Michael Pollan, who we talked about with regards to food and edible food-like substances, says that dietitians make things too confusing. Just tell people, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. But we know from talking about this, when he's saying eat food, he's not talking about ultra-processed food. Marion Nessel says eat less, move more, eat fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, and watch out for too much of the junk food. So we can simplify the message even further for our patients and clients if we need to be. The focus is on patterns of food intake. Certainly the Mediterranean diet has received a lot of attention in research as well, and it's showing to be very healthy in so many different ways for mental health, for physical health, to lower the risk of cardiovascular disease, to lower the risk of dementia with aging, to lower the risk of depression earlier in adulthood. So many positives from this diet. It's not the only healthy dietary pattern. A vegetarian diet, a traditional Japanese diet, a Nordic diet. There are many patterns that can bring good health. We tend to see that these patterns rely on plant-based foods, however, and quite often fish more than red meat. Now, you are going to take a look at this in your first homework. This is a plate that was designed by the Harvard School of Public Health, and there are some differences in their plate and the USDA's plate. So you'll be looking at that and expect a test question as well. All right, so we said we were going to focus on guidelines and reference points. What we're looking at with the dietary reference intakes are reference points and recommendations. But now instead of saying things like, keep added sugar to less than 10%, eat more fruits and vegetables. Now we're talking about specific nutrients and the amount that the individual needs. Okay, those are the dietary reference intakes. There are a number of different established dietary reference intakes. Please look at them, read through this in the textbook. I would mention that we will be working with the RDA quite a lot, the UL quite a lot, and I am going to add in the AMDR as well. Here is a table that describes all of them except the AMDR. The RDA are the recommendations. How much iron do I need? How much iron do you need? It's specific to a gender age grouping. So you'll see that as you look through the RDA. The UL establish when you are reaching a level where toxicities show up. So you might be getting too much. And the daily value we'll talk about with regards to food labels. So this is really, really important. So I want to take a minute here. The RDA is the recommendation for the intake of a specific nutrient, and it covers the need of almost everyone, okay, 97 to 98%. We mentioned the UL is a point at which you're getting too much. There is a big old margin of safety between the RDA and the UL. So if you look at your NCP reports and see that you exceeded 100%, 100% the RDA, that doesn't mean that you're getting too much, because you're probably in this safety zone. The only way to know whether you get too much is to compare your intake to the UL. All right, so we'll get to that later, but remember, there is a margin of safety between the RDA and the UL. And consuming above the RDA but below the UL is perfectly safe. All right. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is stressing the same point again, is that with regards to nutrition, there are problems with too little, there are problems with too much for almost all nutrients, not all. Some nutrients we haven't established a UL. And when we're talking about undernutrition or too little, it typically takes a while to reach the point as when you see deficiency symptoms, clinical symptoms, because we tend to have some stores and we use them up and then we see the problems. Now, I tucked the AMDRs into this video lecture. It's not, your textbook authors have decided not to focus on it, but I want to explain what it is, and you will see this on the test. The AMDRs show the proportions of calories, the ranges that should come from the different energy yielding macronutrients. So we see carbohydrates should be between 45 and 65% of your calories, fat between 20 and 35%, protein between 10 and 35%. So I'm never have been the biggest fan of the AMDRs, because as you will notice when we move on to Unit 2, it's really more important what type of carb, fat, and protein you're consuming, from what sources. That's more important than the total. And yet, I think the AMDRs do help raise a red flag if we see that a diet seems to be way off what these ranges are suggesting, okay? So let's say you're working with a client and their protein is taking up 50% of their calories, okay, and their carbs are down at 30%. Okay, that would kind of wave a red flag to me to look into that and to make sure they're not consuming too many grams of protein and that they're meeting their fuel needs for carbohydrate. All right, so there is a section in this unit on the food label, and this is a great figure that comes from this chapter as well. There are a lot of important things to take note of, but one is when you look at the ingredient listing, please recognize that whatever is listed first weighs in at the greatest. So the ingredients are listed in order from greatest to least for weight. Everything on the nutrition facts corresponds to the serving size outlined. It also could be viewed as a recommended serving size. So it kind of checks you if you typically eat 10 cookies and the serving size says 2, you might think twice about that. And then know what a daily value is. Daily value is a percentage that shows you what percentage of the entire day's allowance for that specific nutrient is provided in this one serving. Okay, so you can see here that this macaroni and cheese is providing 11% of the fat that you are allotted for a day. And this is for a 2,000 calorie diet. So that has to be kept in mind too. It's an average person, 13% of the saturated fat, etc. One of the rules that's helpful is the 5 and 20 rule. The 5 and 20 rule states 5% low, 20% high. So we can see that this is kind of on the high end for sodium, and it's pretty low for fiber, which probably isn't a surprise when you look at this food, okay, the macaroni and cheese, this product. Here's another example of this label. This is the newer nutrition facts label, which is rolling out and should be on most foods by now, but you can see we're still using the calories, which we enlarged to bring attention to that. Serving sizes were updated to be more realistic, and different vitamins and minerals are included. These are vitamins and minerals that we tend not to get enough of. Okay, I wanted to use this. These are both manicotti products. So this shows you how you might compare two products side by side. And right off the bat, you can see that there are big differences in fat and type of fat, right? And cholesterol as well. Seems like this manicotti may be made with a low fat, very low fat cheese. Sodium also, okay? Let's look at the serving size. The serving size is the same. So I'd be tempted to purchase this one and give it a try. All right, so lastly, this chapter also looks at nutritional assessment and what that is. And they use the ABCDE method of remembering the different parts of a nutritional assessment. And I want to make a point that is very important as we go along here. So nutritional assessment was one of my favorite parts of being a clinical dietitian. It's pulling the pieces of the puzzle together so that you can figure out what's going on with the patient or client nutritionally, and then make a plan. Anthropometric measurements are body weight, length, circumferences. They are measurements. Biochemical assessment are the labs. Clinical assessment is looking at the patient, listening to them as well. So appearance of skin, eyes, tongue, their gait, their hair, etc. Dietary assessment is some method of determining what that individual's diet is and how it compares to their needs. And then environmental assessment is very important because we certainly need to consider things like budget and living conditions and ability to get out and shop and cook. Now, what I wanted to make very clear here is that these are pieces of a puzzle and we need to use them all. One of the test questions asks you about this right here, but let me stop and I keep losing these reports. All right, so let me see if I can find a good example. So these are a 3-day report. And okay, I have a great example. Over the 3 days where records were kept, this person, Monique, met only 52% of her iron needs. That was her average, half of what her body needs. Now the question is, does that mean that she's anemic? Does that mean that she has an iron deficiency? And the answer is we need more information. Specifically, we need her blood work, right? When you create your 3-day assessment, when you create these reports as part of the first Nutrition Applied, we can't use them to define or diagnose, I should say, a deficiency. We can use them to raise some red flags. Your iron is rather low. If this is actually your pattern for an extended period of time, this would put you at risk for iron deficiency anemia. But the diet alone does not diagnose, okay? You need to pull all those pieces together, okay? So thank you. That closes up chapter 2.